Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Syria's new de facto leader says he will name the senior members of Assad's government responsible for war crimes as he offers rewards for information. Meanwhile, Israel destroys the Syrian naval fleet and targets suspected chemical weapons sites. In Tel Aviv, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu testifies in his corruption case for the first time as he's charged with bribery, fraud and breach of trust. An Ivy League graduate, Luigi Mangione, is charged with the fatal shooting of the United Healthcare CEO in New York City after being arrested by police in Pennsylvania. To our top story, and the HTS leader says incoming authorities will announce a list of former senior Assad officials they believe were involved in war crimes. In a statement on Telegraph, Ahmed al-Sharaa offered rewards to anyone who provides information. Mohammed al-Bashar has been named Syria's caretaker prime minister until March 2025 by the HTS. He's been speaking to Al Arabiya.
Today, a session of the Council of Ministers was held, bringing together the working team of the Syrian Salvation Government, which was operating in the Idlib region, along with representatives from the government of the deposed Syrian regime. The session focused on transferring institutions and files from the deposed regime's government to the Syrian interim government, which will oversee these files and manage operations. Essentially, this will serve as a transitional government tasked with running day-to-day affairs, with the transitional period expected to conclude, God willing, by the 1st of March 2025. This mandate was assigned by the general leadership, entrusting us with the responsibility of managing the Syrian government's operations.
Our correspondent Trent Murray is currently on the Syrian border and has sent us this report.
Well, as the dust settles on these historic days in Syria, we are now starting to get a clue over how this new HTS-led authority will look to govern Syria. News today, Mohammed al-Bashar has been appointed as the caretaker prime minister. He ran what was a quasi-government effectively in Syrian opposition territory before this lightning offensive, and HTS has now put him in charge of Syria more broadly until March 1, 2025. We're also seeing how they may react to former officials of the Assad regime. They have said that those involved in torture in Syria will be held accountable, and they are compiling a list of names, saying that while at the same time saying that they will continue to try and reach out to broader groups inside of the country, including minorities like Christians and Kurds. We are seeing, though, yet more signs of the desperate situation in Damascus under the Assad regime. Rescuers finding a morgue with some 40 bodies inside that they said showed signs of torture. And of course, the broader geopolitical implications of all of this continue to play out. We are here at the Syria-Israel border, where we are seeing continued military maneuvers from the Israeli Defense Force. We know tanks and troops are continuing to move just beyond that buffer zone there, separating the two sides, but also operating in the sky. Over 300 airstrikes reported targeting former Assad military bases, Air Force bases, Navy ports and weapon storage areas. The Israelis are saying the justification for that is they want to make sure that those weapons don't fall into the hands of extremists. But of course, many in this region are expressing concern, including the likes of Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, who have said Israel is effectively using the power vacuum inside of Syria to seize more territory for itself.
Trent Murray on the Syrian border. Thank you very much for that report. Sticking with Syria now, as local media have reported, Israeli warplanes have carried out dozens of attacks across the country, including in the capital city of Damascus. There's suspected links to chemical weapons amongst the sites hit, with Israel claiming it's acting to stop weapons falling into the hands of extremists after the fall of Assad. The Israeli Navy has also destroyed the Syrian naval fleet. I'm now able to speak to former British Army Colonel and chemical weapons expert Hamish D. Breton Gordon. Hamish, thank you so much for joining us. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz has confirmed troops destroyed the Syrian military fleet overnight. Really, what is the justification for this?
Well, I think, as your report said, the Israelis are trying to prevent any key bits of equipment falling into extremist hands. And we know that there's still a large group of ISIS jihadists in the east of Syria. So the most important thing is, at the moment, is securing the Assad chemical weapons stockpile. Unfortunately, when it was declared in 2013, Assad and his ministers lied about the extent of it. And we know that there's still a lot of chemical weapons in Syria. And this seems to be the main aim of the Israeli attacks, to try and destroy those dumps of chemical weapons by blowing them up. And we also, my own personal experience with the Iraqi Kurd Peshmerga military in the fight with ISIS back in 2015, 2017, we knew that ISIS had chemical weapons and fired them at us. So it's crucial that whether the Israelis or anybody else destroy these chemical weapons as soon as possible before they can get into extremists' hands.
Hamish, I just want to pick up on something you mentioned there. Is there this potential threat that ISIS could make a reappearance on the global stage following the fall of Assad? Is this why this is happening and unfolding right now?
Well, certainly, along with the Israelis, the US are also conducting extensive airstrikes on ISIS, Islamic State groups, and some of their encampments in the east of the country. Now that ISIS have been subdued by the Iraqi military and also the Iraqi Kurd military, along with the coalition, it's key that these extremists are not allowed to develop and not giving the chance. So, yeah, I for one welcome the US strikes to make sure that they cannot get involved, so that the people in Syria have a chance to be able to rebuild their country so badly devastated by Assad. And as your report says, the early signs with the setting up of an interim government to try and keep the government agencies running seems to me a positive step. And I spent many years in Idlib province helping medical setups and others. And I know that the people there and all my Syrian friends are incredibly excited, and anything the international community can do to help with this smooth transition is to be welcomed.
Hamish, of course, you say there's excitement, but there's also trepidation on what is to come in the future when it comes to Syria, and we look forward to who will, take place and what will happen in the country. But I just want to go back to the chemical weapons, because obviously you mentioned there the OPCW destroyed those weapons in 2013. So right now, why are we worried? Do we know how many weapons are left in Syria? Do we know anything about this at all?
Well, certainly, I was in Syria at the time trying to find evidence of the chemical attacks by Assad. And when the Assad government declared its stockpile of chemical weapons, about 1,500 tons of precursors, certainly myself and the other experts who knew about these things thought that that was woefully short. In fact, they probably declared less than 50% of the chemical weapons they had, subsequently used them many, many times. And it's clear that those places where they stored them and developed them were still intact. I think it's fairly clear as well that coalition US and other Middle Eastern countries who've been involved in the coalition, their intelligence knows where these sites are, and it would appear the Israelis do as well. So, yeah, they still exist. They are a real threat. And the sooner they're removed. In a perfect world, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the UN watchdog, would go in and remove them or destroy them in place. Now, that hopefully will happen, and certainly the OPCW will go and verify that they've all been destroyed. But at the moment, things are very tricky in the country, and the force protection required for a UN agency to go in will take a time to put together. But I hope the UN and the OPCW are ready to go and help in Syria and also to verify the destruction of those chemical weapons.
Hamish, just moving on, we know that Russia has been a staunch supporter of the former Assad government and is currently giving the former president asylum. But can Syria really rest easy now? We've been talking there about how much the people have suffered, from attacks from Russia and Iran, or is there still a threat of these Assad allies in Syria?
Well, I think you make a very good point there. The Russians and the Iranians have made the Syrian people suffer far too much over the last 10 or so years. It is clear that the Russians have run away in numbers very quickly. So I think the chance that the Russians can still have an effect, all their forces and all their aircraft have gone. There may well be some Iranian militias still around, but the Iranian militias and Hezbollah and some of the other supporters have been much denuded over the last few months and particularly over the last few weeks. And I think Tehran itself has been very severely damaged by what's happening. So hopefully, and I know there are a lot of ifs and buts around, the Russians and the Iranians should not be able to affect what's happening in Syria. And the best thing the international community can do is to help the Syrian people, most of who are moderate and secular minded, to rebuild their country. That's where Western and Middle Eastern resources and money hopefully will come in and give them a chance to set up a new moderate country, as certainly every Syrian I know, that's what they desire. And let's hope the international community can do it. And we can learn an awful lot from the disasters of what happened after Saddam Hussein was deposed in 2003, and also some of the way we dealt with what in Afghanistan. But we've learned those lessons, and hopefully they can help the new Syrian government develop a country that the Syrian people want and deserve.
Hamish de Breton Gordon, the former British Army colonel and chemical weapons expert, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
To Tel Aviv now, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appeared in court today charged with bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Netanyahu has been told by judges that he's expected to testify 3 times a week despite the ongoing war in Gaza and the current situation in neighbouring Syria. It is the first time a sitting Israeli Prime Minister has been charged with the crime, and he denies any wrongdoing and is pleading not guilty. I'm now joined by Daily Telegraph correspondent Jotam Confino from Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv. Jotam, good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So this kind of trial has never been seen before in Israel, and Netanyahu has fiercely denied any of these wrongdoings. Basically, he's saying it's a witch hunt. Is he right?
That's the question we're hopefully going to find out. Netanyahu has for years now accused this of being a conspiracy made up by the deep state, as he calls it. It's basically the left-wing elite in Israel who are working together with the judicial system, the attorney general, the police even, and they're all trying to topple the democratically elected leader that is Netanyahu. Now, this is, of course, a wild accusation, and it's something that Netanyahu is trying to convince all of the people who support him that is the case. But I think most Israelis see this as a fair trial, because Netanyahu has admitted to meeting a lot of the people that he allegedly made some quid pro quo deals with to get favorable media coverage and also getting cigars and champagne worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So either way, Netanyahu cannot simply deny that he knows all of these people. Some of them have turned state witnesses, and he might not be guilty of all of these things. But if he's found guilty of just one of them, it could send him to jail, and of course, it could end his political career forever.
So this has been a long-running corruption case, but I'm wondering, and lots of questions have been asked, is why has there been such a delay in this case?
It's a good question. First of all, Israel's judicial system is under immense pressure. There's a lack of, first of all, lack of judges, but also it's extremely tedious. The former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, who was also indicted and actually ended up going to jail, his case also took years. And Netanyahu's 3 cases are much more complicated. So it's not a big surprise that it's taken a lot of time. And you have to also add that we experienced a pandemic during his trial, which also delayed all of this. And of course, the war in Gaza. And now the situation in Syria, which has also delayed the trial significantly. So many different things played a role here in the delay of it. But still, we're 4 years into this, and only now is Netanyahu taking the witness stand. And we don't know exactly when there'll be a verdict, but it'll likely take plenty more time before we see that.
And this isn't the only battle Netanyahu is facing. The ICC are also pursuing him for war crimes for his role in the Gaza war. What more do we know?
So Netanyahu is probably the most haunted man on the planet right now when it comes to trials and wars. It's quite extraordinary that he has to deal with all these things at the same time. When it comes to the ICC, Netanyahu has managed to convince some of his allies, in particular France, to make a U-turn when it comes to this arrest warrant. They will no longer arrest him if he sets foot in France, but the US and Germany and other countries also won't. So he is still safe in several countries. But I think he's more concerned about his own trial here, because the worst thing that can happen to him is that he's found guilty in all of these 3 cases, which could send him to jail for 10 years. And he would go down in history as the most corrupt prime minister in Israel's history. That is not the legacy he wants to leave. Netanyahu is trying to portray himself as a modern-day Thomas Jefferson, as he said in trial today, as somebody who's a Churchill-like statesman who fights for Israel's interests. And of course, this trial is a huge stain on his career.
Jotam Confino, correspondent from the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some other stories making the headlines today. Residents in Malibu, California have been evacuated after a wildfire broke out on Monday night. Firefighters have been tackling the blaze, which has been dubbed the Franklin Fire. It started in Malibu Canyon and is thought to be a bush blaze, which has affected hundreds of acres of vegetation. Donald Trump's son, Eric, says he doesn't want a role in the US government, but believes there will be a very large wall between Trump's organization and the government. Speaking in Abu Dhabi, he also revealed US partners in the Gulf can expect peace, stability and safety from his father's second term as president. Germany will make migrant smuggling to the UK a criminal offence in a bid to tackle small boat crossings. Last night, the British Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, signed the deal with her German counterpart. Under the agreement, the 2 countries will also work together to remove smuggling content from social media. Jay-Z has asked for the identity of the woman accusing him of rape to be revealed or the case be dismissed. The music mogul, real name Sean Carter, denies the assault on the 13-year-old, which allegedly took place after the MTV Video Music Awards in 2000. Brazil's president is said to be recovering from surgery after a brain bleed. Lula da Silva was taken to hospital on Monday after complaining of a headache. Doctors who performed a craniotomy say the president is in a stable condition and was conscious following the operation. New Zealand plans to ban greyhound racing, citing an unacceptably high rate of injuries. The government plans to wind down the industry over the next 20 months to allow time for the rehoming of racing dogs. Commercial greyhound racing is currently allowed in Australia, Ireland, the UK and also the US. And Time magazine's Person of the Year shortlist has been revealed today. The top 10 finalists include the podcaster Joe Rogan, Catherine the Princess of Wales, President-elect Donald Trump, Republican election candidate Kamala Harris, and the tech tycoon Elon Musk. To the US now, and a 26-year-old has been charged with murder over a fatal shooting in New York last week that sparked a major manhunt across multiple US states. Luigi Mangione, who for days was America's most wanted man, was detained in Pennsylvania after being recognized at a McDonald's. He's suspected of killing Brian Thompson, the CEO of the country's largest healthcare insurance company. Benji Hyer reports.
Luigi Mangione taken into custody overnight, an employee at this fast food restaurant in the town of Altoona, tipping off officers and bringing to an end a widespread search for the gunman.
For just over 5 days, our NYPD investigators combed through thousands of hours of video, followed up on hundreds of tips, and processed every bit of forensic evidence, DNA, fingerprints, IP addresses, and so much more to tighten the net. We deployed drones, canine units, and scuba divers. We leveraged the domain awareness system, Argus cameras, and conducted aviation canvasses. And our detectives also went door to door, interviewing potential witnesses and doing the good old-fashioned police work that our investigators are famous for.
Mangione was arrested almost 400 kilometres from the scene of the crime. This is him readying his firearm before discharging it at point-blank range in Midtown Manhattan. A premeditated, targeted attack, officials say, against Brian Thompson, boss of United Healthcare.
Violence can never be used to address political differences, or to address a substantive difference, or to try and prove some ideological point. That is not what we do in a civilized society. That was true in Butler, it was true in New York City, and it's true anywhere. That is not how you make progress in this country. The person, the suspect here, who shot at that CEO and killed that CEO is a coward, not a hero. And we need to make sure that in this country, we get back to having a civil discourse about our differences. And that is an important lesson coming out of Pennsylvania, and it is one that I think the rest of the nation needs to hear as well.
Police are now looking into a motive. Mangione was found in possession of an unregistered ghost gun, possibly made from a 3D printer, as well as a manifesto critical of corporate America and the health insurance sector, referring to industry heads as parasites. He'd recently suffered a painful back injury, according to his estranged friends. His family say they're shocked and devastated by the news. The Maryland-born computer science university graduate is currently being held without bail in Pennsylvania before being presented with the option of waiving or contesting his extradition to the state of New York. Benji Hyer, Al Arabiya News.
To Asia now, and Taiwan says it has detected dozens of ships in the biggest maritime mobilization around Taiwan in years, as it monitors what it says is a surge of Chinese military activities in the Taiwan Strait and the Western Pacific. Beijing voiced fury at President Lai Chang-te's recent visit to the United States, but has not confirmed it is carrying out any exercises. Laura Westbrook has more.
Taiwan has been on alert since its president, William Lai Ching-te, made his first overseas trip as president, and that included stops in Hawaii and the U.S. territory of Guam last week, as has been practice for years. But during his stop in Guam, Lai called on like-minded countries to never bow down to totalitarianism, and that trip has drawn the ire of Beijing, who calls Lai a separatist and threatened to counter with resolute measures. China claims Taiwan as its own to be reunited by force if necessary. And according to reports, around 90 Chinese naval and coast guard ships were in regional waters and around the Taiwan Strait. That appears to be broader than previous exercises. Earlier, Taiwan's defense ministry said it had also detected 47 Chinese aircraft around the island. Beijing, though, has not announced military drills or acknowledged the large-scale deployment mentioned by Taipei. However, a Beijing foreign ministry spokeswoman said on Tuesday that China will resolutely defend its sovereignty. China has been ramping up military activities around Taiwan for years. These are what's known as grey zone tactics. That's military speak for moves that fall between war and peace. Analysts have told me that this represents a new way for China to increase pressure on Taiwan. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said on Monday that China was the only country in the world that has the intent and increasingly the capability to change the rules-based international order. Like most countries, the United States does not recognize Taiwan as independent, but it opposes any attempt to take the island by force and is committed to supplying it with weapons to defend itself.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the top business news. And job vacancies in the United Kingdom have fallen faster than similar countries over the past year, according to recruitment platform Indeed. The company's data showed there were 23% fewer jobs advertised on its site compared to a year earlier. It's thought to be connected to the loss of momentum in the British economy. The cost of coffee is set to increase after the price for Arabica beans topped $3.44 a pound, having already jumped more than 80% this year. Coffee producers in Brazil and Vietnam are blaming bad weather for the lack of crops. A Nevada court has denied Rupert Murdoch's bid to change a trust and give full control of News Corp to his eldest son Lorcan when he dies. According to the New York Times, the court believed Murdoch and his son had acted in bad faith by intentionally cutting out the media mogul's other two children for fear of interference, calling their efforts a carefully crafted charade. Turning to sports now, and a former world cycling champion could be jailed for 7 years after admitting to causing death by dangerous driving. Rowan Dennis was arrested and charged in relation to a car crash that killed his wife, fellow Olympic cyclist Melissa Hodgkins, in Adelaide in Australia in December last year. And world number one tennis star Aryna Sabalenka has won the WTA Player of the Year. It comes after the Belarusian banked 4 titles in 2024, winning both the Australian and the US Opens. My personal favourite player too. A reminder of our top stories today. Syria's new de facto leader says he will name the senior members of Assad's government responsible for war crimes as he offers rewards for information. Meanwhile, Israel destroys a Syrian naval fleet and targets suspected chemical weapons sites. In Tel Aviv, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu testifies in his corruption case for the first time as he's charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. An Ivy League graduate, Luigi Mangione, is charged with the fatal shooting of the United Healthcare CEO in New York City after being arrested by police in Pennsylvania. And that's all from us on W News. Thanks for joining us. Special interview is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night.